So first the fireflies are disabled. Now they're enabled. And they're back to being disabled again. Hey everybody, my name is Yyanthire. So I wanted to create a mechanism that would enable and disable my particle effects as the camera gets closer or further from them. I think I've developed something pretty decent, as you can see before you. So I kind of move the camera around. This can of course be applied more universally, so if you put it on top of a player, for example, that would also work. So without further ado, let's jump into the tutorial. Alright, so to be as efficient as possible, I'm just going to give you guys the full lowdown of what to do, how to set it up, and also how to make it work. So the first things first, we're going to create a new script and we're going to attach it to whatever object we want it to be attached to. In this case, I'm going to have it on the main camera. And we're just going to call it whatever you like. I chose object toggler. After that, we're then going to need to make an object for it to be able to disable or enable. So in this case, I have all these fireflies here. As you can see here, the only two things of importance actually are the capsule collider element. So you need some kind of collider on them. And then you need to put them on a specific layer that your preference is. You can pick the default, but it is much more preferred to at least try to be more organized and put them on a preferred layer. In this case, I have layer 16, particle effects layer. For visualness, I just added this mesh renderer. This is just so you can see them in the world, but realistically you don't need them. And in fact, I'm going to be removing this completely for the actual live build of the game. As you can see here, the main part of it is this root game object here, the one with the collider on it and the layer set, and then the sub object. We're going to be enabling and disabling this object here. What this is it's basically just my particle effects. I found this to be the most applicable, most useful for my case, but in your case you're going to need to really decide on what you want to enable and disable. We have to keep this root object active with the collider on it in order for Unity to be able to do a physics call on it. However, what you do here is totally up to your preference. In my case, I think the most universal, in a sense, is really just setting it as a child object and then just turning it on or off. For the code, we're going to be starting this object off, so we don't want it enabled at all. Alright, so let's hop into the code and I'll explain what's going on. Alright, so here we are in the code view. I should mention that I'm going to have a paste bin link below of all the code, just cleaned up a little bit further, so it's easy for copy and pasting. So let's go ahead and jump into all of the variable definitions for the code. The first one here is of course the radius. This is going to be the size, or essentially the radius of the sphere physics call that we're going to be doing later on. You're going to want to set this to a public value to begin with and just test it out and make sure you're getting your right value and right enabling, disabling as you prefer. If you want something very close, you're going to want to probably set a smaller value. In the clips just seen before you, I had it set to about 10. In the live game, it's actually going to be set to about 100, and this is going to be perfect because as the camera starts to get really far away, that's when it's going to disable the particle effects. So I found this to be my ideal value, but you'll need to hunt around for yours. So this next variable is this num objects. This is going to be how many colliders we're going to be able to hit in the physics call. Since we're going to be doing a non-alloc physics call, just so we can save on garbage collection, we're going to just set this to a pretty generous value. I don't imagine having 250 different particle effects in a single frame, or in a single screen, I would say. But it's a pretty generous value, just so you can kind of bump it up to how you feel like. The next is going to be our 3 lists. So this particle objects is just going to be used for our physics call. The one following this is going to keep all of the particle objects that were hit in a single update cycle in here. This is going to be changed out pretty much every update cycle and cleared out. And then this is our all active objects. So this is every single object that we have currently active in between frames. And this in between frames is really important because we're going to be doing things not only in the update cycle primarily, but also once per second. And which is what this variable is for here, is just to make sure that we're only running our code about once per second. Since in my case, I'm going to be having it so that the viewing distance is very long, I think this is totally fine. But if you need something where you're moving the character very quickly or something like that, you're going to probably want to either decrement this or just get rid of it completely so it's running every frame. So to start off the bulk of the code, we begin here by just removing every single object we saw the last update cycle. So in this case, this was a whole second ago. From here, this is the main call that we're going to be doing right here. So we're going to do an overlap sphere non-alloc. This is basically just going to give us, or basically just create a sphere in the world in the position that our current camera is, with the radius of the radius we passed in, and only seeing the layer that we want to see. So in our particular case, if I were to go back to here, as you remember before, everything's on this layer 16 particle effects layer. As you can see, my code has already basically just made sure that this is like a global aspect, but for your particular code, you're going to be wanting to put something in here along the lines of, say, 1, and then you're going to bit shift it, and then put our layer in here. What this does here is it basically just gives us our desired layer mask. As you can see, it's just an integer passed in there. Let's get rid of that. Alright, so moving forward, after the physics call is done, it's going to return our series of objects. This is just basically just a straight up number of everything that it found. We're going to loop through all of them, just do a quick little check and make sure that the object that we found isn't null. And then we're going to add it to our list of things we've discovered this cycle. And if it doesn't exist in our all active objects list already, we're going to go ahead and add it. Finally, from there, I'll get into this chunk of code a little bit later, but this one is where we're going to be essentially enabling or disabling our little child object here. So moving forward, the next major part of the code is determining what we've seen this cycle versus what is our entire list of active objects, and make sure that what we've seen this cycle either matches up with that, or if it doesn't match up with that, we're going to disable it. So that's what this code's doing here. We're going to be doing a backwards iteration through all active objects. This is just so that we can take advantage of being able to remove objects as we see them. This is very important because if I were to do like a for each loop here, it would not let me do a remove element call. From there, we're just going to do a basic simple call where if the current active object that we're looking at exists in our list of objects that we found this update frame, and we determine that by just looking at their instance IDs. These are always going to be unique IDs assigned to each game object in the world, so you don't need to worry about anything else. Just use this, and it'll make sure that you're always picking the same object. From there, we're just going to set the object active, and as mentioned previously, we're just going to remove it from our all active objects list. So now the bulk of the code, or not the bulk of the code, but the most critical element of the code, and this function I was alluding to earlier, is a pretty simple function. You're going to need to switch this out for your custom code. In my custom code, I'm just doing a physics call, finding this object right here, grabbing the child, and then enabling or disabling the child as I see fit. So that's what it's doing here. We're just doing a quick call, make sure that our object's not null. Just good practice to always do that. Making sure that our object that we found also has children. So if this, for example, didn't exist, we wouldn't be trying to do some sort of null reference exception on it or anything like that. From there, we're just going to grab the child. This is just a direct call to the first child it sees. In my code, I'm only going to have this one child, so I don't need to worry about that. But in your code, you might need to. And then from there, just either grab the child, make sure it exists, and then set it active or inactive. And that's pretty much all of the code. So I hope you guys like this little tutorial here. As you can see, this is how the code is going to look like in the full game. These particle effects, of course, are going to be a lot larger because they're just so small and you can't really even see them. But as you can see over here, got my radius set to 100, and all of our objects are enabled. Let's go ahead and move over here. And when I do so, you'll notice that the further I get away, once it goes beyond that 100 size, it's going to disable. And you can see this disabling over there on the side there. So as I come backwards some more, keeping in mind that once per second call. And there we go. You can see some of them getting disabled. And there's all of them disabled. And if I can go ahead and kind of show you, you can see here, you don't really see them. It's really hard to tell anyway, because they're just so small. But in the live game, you can imagine that they're probably going to be as big as this home. It's going to move forward a little bit. And they're all enabled. It's pretty much impossible to see, but they're there. Alright, I hope you liked the tutorial.